Hello, Stephen. Happy 4th of July to you too. And hello, everybody else who is joining this IFT 372 study session. So again, we're going into week 8 here. Next week will be the start of it, if you're counting by Mondays. And so it is final exam time. And again, the final exam opens on the 4th. Not that I would necessarily suggest you do it then, but that's when it'll become available, and it'll be open through the 10th. So you do have some time to take it. You have about a week to take it. So I would take as much time as you need to review your material, and then just make sure you do it by the 10th. I will be doing at least a study session on Thursday of this coming week. So let me check the date on that. The 6th. So I will be doing another study session on the 6th, at least, probably the Sunday as well, which is the 9th. But again, use the discussion board. There haven't been a ton of posts so far, so I just assume everybody's been sitting around doing their own work, which is fine. But if you need questions answered, I will be available, obviously, through the week, either by email or discussion board or the study sessions on Thursday and Sunday. So today we do have some stuff still due tonight, like the activity and the homework. So if there are any questions on those two, I can address those, or we can just focus on the final review if there's any questions on that. At what time EST for the study sessions or for the final, Stephen? Same time as usual, so it would be 7 to 8 Arizona time, which would be, what is that, plus 3? Usual time. Question concerning the activity, sure. Understand that I'm looking at 802.11 protocol messages. guess I don't understand if there's something deeper than learning what the messages are doing. So not especially for this activity, it's kind of an introduction to Wireshark and what you would typically, how we can relate Wireshark to what we've been looking at, especially for 802.11. Is it just generally kind of the process as we're going through, you kind of understand that we're following through with it, but not necessarily. It's basically the activity is just kind of showing you the infrastructure in practice, what it actually looks like in an actual implementation. So it's more of just seeing in a real life situation, or as close to a real life situation as you would expect. You're seeing the architecture that we kind of looked over and getting an idea of what it actually entails. Yeah, so yeah, the beacon message, like you said, is basically coming from the base station or access point, whatever you want to call it, and is broadcasting the information that the individual clients or devices would need to connect to the network. And that's why you have things like the SSID contained in the beacon. Not especially. I mean, like I said, it's kind of just looking through Wireshark and you can see that the traffic's encrypted. And so it's just showing you that, okay, this is some of how we're basically observing in a real system what the individual aspects of the architecture. So that's why it goes through the individual steps, such as identifying the beacon frames, looking at the probe responses, looking at the encryption, and observing the initialization vector changing for the encryption. So it's just kind of giving you a look at what it all looks like in practice, or when you're actually applying the architecture in a, again, quote-unquote, real-world scenario. And you will do more with Wireshark in later classes, most likely. So again, this is kind of just an introduction of how to use it, some of the filtering options. Wireshark's pretty cool. You can do some interesting stuff with it. Oh yeah, if you've done intro to internet security, yeah, you'll definitely have hit on Wireshark there. Dr. Helm definitely likes Wireshark. And it is pretty cool. You can see a lot of this stuff. It's just a matter of knowing what you've got to use it for. It's a very powerful tool for sure, and you don't necessarily need to take full advantage of it, but there is a lot you can do with it. It's just a matter of knowing what you're looking for and how to look for it. Okay, so would it be possible to explain this a little? How does FH-CDMA differ from DS-CDMA? Sure. So basically, okay, so yeah, you've already addressed FH as frequency hopping. I know that much. Yeah, so that's the main thing that defines FH-CDMA, is that you're using frequency hopping. And frequency hopping is where you have the PN code, the transmitter and receiver basically do a short burst, and then they jump to a different frequency, short burst, different frequency, etc. And so the main distinction to make with DS-CDMA is that you're basically combining the chipping frequency and the baseband frequency, but then you have multiple signals transmitting into that same kind of area, into the same spectrum, but then there's that unique code sequence to each device. So that's the important part, is with direct sequence, each device has a unique code. So it's kind of like the PN code of frequency hopping, but it serves a different purpose. So for direct sequence, the devices are identified by their own unique codes, which allows basically the device to retrieve its specific data from the mess of all the other devices that are broadcasting into the same spectrum, because they're all sharing the same space. They're all using a baseband frequency and then a chipping frequency into a spectrum, but then they need to use a unique code to each device to retrieve that. And basically they filter out all the other signals based on that specific code. So the main distinction is with frequency hopping, with FH-CDMA, you're using a PN code to hop frequencies and broadcasting. You're not typically sharing that space with any other devices or broadcasters, because they would be hopped at a different point. They would be hopped to a different frequency at a different point in time than you would. doesn't frequency hopping basically do the same thing? It's similar, but you don't have multiple devices broadcasting on the same frequency at once. So if we take Bluetooth, for example, and we had that homework problem about Bluetooth packets colliding, you can have multiple devices communicating on the same network for Bluetooth, or rather on the same piconet, since we're talking about Bluetooth, but they're not broadcasting on the same frequency at the same time. They have a select, so for Bluetooth, they have 80 possible frequencies they can select from. And so you can have 5 devices, but they're not going to be talking on the same frequency channel at once. They're going to be on different ones, and then they'll hop, and they shouldn't be colliding. But with direct sequence, everybody's talking into the same spectrum. All devices are talking into a same frequency range, but then there's a unique code that they're encoding their conversation with that they can then, the receiver can then look at, okay, I need to filter out all the traffic based on this code, and I will only pick up this one device. You're receiving signals from all devices at once, but you can filter based on the code, and you end up with only the one communication you need to listen to. And so one of the consequences of that is that with frequency hopping, you need to have a much wider bandwidth available because you need that range of frequencies that's possible. You need to have 80 different frequency channels. You need to have a number of different frequency channels available to hop to. So you need a much bigger bandwidth. But with direct sequence, everything's basically communicating into the same channel, so you don't need as much bandwidth, but you need to be able to distinguish individual devices from each other. And that's why you need that code. Let me see if I can find a lecture slide that gives some more information. So frequency hopping, one device is hopping around a group of frequencies. Yeah, but you could also have multiple devices doing that. But the idea is that they're not on the same frequency at once. While in DS, multiple devices are using the same frequency. Yeah, that's essentially what it boils down to. Basically, yeah, like you said, in DS CDMA, you have a bunch of devices sharing a same spectrum. But with frequency hopping, technically each device has exclusive access to a frequency for a very short period of time, and then it hops and has a very short burst of exclusive control, then it hops. And so, the important thing to remember is how the codes differ, because for frequency hopping, the receiver and the transmitter need to know the code so that they're talking at the same time on the same frequency. So they need to be synchronized. They need to know the same PN code so that they're hopping in sync. They both know when to jump to which frequency so they can communicate at all. With DS CDMA, you need to know the code in order to determine which device you're listening to. So by changing the code, you'll determine which of the multiple devices you're listening to. Otherwise, you just get noise of all the devices if you're not filtering for a specific code. Yeah, I'm looking to see if there's a better explanation in the lecture. I think the quickest way to sum it up is that with like we said, with frequency hopping, you have basically one device per frequency channel for a short period of time. And so as long as you're hopping with the device on the right frequency channel, then you're only receiving that one device. So all you have to worry about is making sure you're on the right frequency channel at the right time. But with direct sequence, you have all these devices broadcasting into the same spectrum, and so you just need to make sure you're listening to the right device out of all of them. So it's not a matter of timing. You're not trying to be at the right hop at the right time. All you're doing is just you're listening to this mass of devices communicating, and you're filtering based on a specific code, so you're only listening to one particular device. My other question from the homework was related to what technique does wireless LAN use to gain channel access and prevent interference in a shared spectrum? Okay. Yeah, so when we're talking about a wireless LAN, when we talked about things like Bluetooth or basically what we were talking about in the previous question was CDMA, right? Which stands for carrier detection or collision detection, multiple access. And so that means that the channel is able to detect when a collision occurs and initiate a rebroadcast or something like that. But when we're talking about a wireless LAN, we have to do something kind of different because we don't really want collisions to happen at all. But we still need to let multiple users access the channel. And so a typical wireless LAN is usually looking at, hold on. So typically what we're looking at for a wireless LAN is CSMA CD, which is carrier sense multiple access. collision detecting. And the way that works is that typically you have the carrier sense part is where the device, whatever the wireless device, is listening to the network. So the device needs to transmit. It listens to the network to see if anybody else is currently transmitting. If no other device is currently transmitting or talking on the network, then it knows that it's allowed to broadcast at that point. If it does detect that somebody is talking on the network, then it needs to obviously not broadcast, and it decides to wait a random amount of time until it tries again. And then at that point, it'll then listen to see if anybody's broadcasting. And so that's the main way that CSMA CD works, is that you listen to the network, and that's a carrier sense. So you're sensing what's going on the current transmission medium. If nothing's happening, then you know that you're clear to broadcast, so you can just go ahead and say what you need to say. But if there is something happening, if somebody else is already communicating, then you have to wait until it's free, and you add a little bit of delay in just to give a little bit extra time. And then you try again. And so for wireless LANs, we'll use CSMA CD. But then with wired LANs like Ethernet, it's typically CDMA. And let me see where that's described. That makes sense, just the wireless equivalent. Yeah, so basically with wireless, you use the CSMA because it's not necessarily practical to detect if a collision happened in a wireless environment. But then you do want to enforce collision detection because it is still possible that the collisions will happen, and you would like to know about it if they do, because obviously then you've had an issue. And so the way we write it out is CSMA, because CSMA is the primary method. You basically listen to the network, only broadcast when it's available, but then you also provide collision detection via other means. So there's additional infrastructure and work that's required to get this collision detection working. Or actually, hold on. I'm not, hold on, I'm not convinced this is right, looking at the notes I'm looking at. No, I think it's not quite right here. So let me walk it back a little bit. So when I was saying we want to have the collision detection, that's not entirely true for wireless networks. This is what we want to use for Ethernet or wired stations, because we can determine if a collision happens much easier. But in wireless, we can't really detect if a collision's actually happened, because the collision would happen in the air. And so it's tricky for any of the stations to realize, okay, wait, there was a collision. Because if that collision's happening, it's happening in radio waves, in open space, and there's no relationship to the broadcast or the transmitter at that point. And so what we need for a wireless LAN, I'm pretty sure we would need collision avoidance. And this is something I'm going to have to check with Dr. Helm, because his notes are different than mine on this. But I hate to bring up the confusion. I think for now, his notes are saying that you want CSMA CD for this situation. I'm not convinced that's entirely right, but for now I would put CSMA CD based on the explanation that I just gave. So again, we're using CSMA CD because we want the CSMA part, carrier sense multiple access, means that our base station is listening to the network and that it's making sure that the medium is not in use when it's trying to broadcast. So that's the carrier sense. It's sensing what's happening on the carrier, and then when there's nobody talking, it's free to communicate. If there is somebody talking, then it has to wait until the medium's open. It waits a little bit of extra time just to be safe. And if it's still open at that point, it'll broadcast or send its message. Now, whether or not it's CD or CA is up for debate, but right now it's CD. Steven says, I'm reading online that it's typically CSMA CA, and yes, I would agree with you, but that's not what Dr. Helm's notes say right now. So right now, because the homework's due tonight and I don't think I'll get a response from him on a Sunday evening, we're going to go with what his notes say, but I would typically agree that it's, and I think it's just a typo, but again, this is what the grader is going to be seeing. So I will double check with him to make sure, but I would say it's CSMA CA, not CD, for wireless LANs. But I need to stick. I don't want to make it any more complicated than it needs to be, so I'm just sticking with his notes for now, and I'll bring it up with him as soon as this is over and see if I can get that fixed. Let me check some of the other. It's possible we're misunderstanding the question, but I do think it's CSMA CA. What's the description appear to be for CSMA CA still? That's a good question, and yeah, it does, because it doesn't mention detection anywhere. It's mostly, his notes are mostly just a description of CSMA, not really the CD or CA part after it, but it's not just this class that's had this typo. I was looking back, and some of the prior classes have had the same typo, so there's a consistency to it, which I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding what he's trying to say. But typically the collision detection is on the wired LAN, not wireless. So again, I'll bring it up with him. For now, for the sake of argument for this question, just mostly address the CSMA part. So mostly just focus on saying, okay, collision sense, multiple access, the carrier listens to the medium, and then if something's already active on the medium, it waits. If it's clear, it broadcasts. If there's something active, it waits until the medium is clear again. So focus on that part and put CD just so you're not marked wrong. But then I will go back over. I don't know. It's hard. It's kind of a tricky situation because I don't know exactly what his thought process is. So I guess I'll leave it up to you. You can either put CSMA CA, which I think is correct, or his notes, which say CSMA CD. But I'll shoot him an email as soon as we're done here to clarify that question. Yeah, I mean, it's possible he'll get back to me tonight, and I can let everyone know. I'll add like a annotation to this video that clarifies what happened if he gets back to me tonight, but I don't necessarily expect him to get back to me on a Sunday evening. Okay, so 16.12 or 16. No, it is 16.12. Okay, so yeah, simply wanted to know how in-depth it needs to be. Let me look and see what the book has for You probably don't need to go too much more in depth than what the book has to say on it, but let me make sure I can get the list of services here and see what we're looking at. if you basically just, so like look, starting at page 558 of the book, where it starts breaking down the individual services, you can basically just have what it lists out there. So for example, for the UGS unsolicited grant service on page 558, it says it's intended for real-time applications that generate fixed-rate data. A service flow with a data delivery service of UGS gets uplink resources assigned at uniform periodic intervals without requesting them each time. And then maybe you can add that it's what it's commonly used for. But that's about what you need. So it's not looking for you to go into too much more detail than what the book gives you, since the book gives a pretty good breakdown. So I would basically just look at the paragraphs that it lists on basically 558 onward and kind of pull the most important sections out, because it gives a pretty thorough breakdown of each of the services at that point. And so I gave the example for UGS, and then for RTVR, it's basically, you're looking at what it's used for. So for example, it's intended for time-sensitive applications. Basically, the principal difference between UGS and RTVR is that RTVR transmits at a rate that varies with time. And then how it's implemented by transmitting the available data at uniform periodic intervals. Just basically summarizing the breakdowns that it gives on 558, 559, etc. So you definitely don't have to copy it verbatim, the whole big chunk of text, but just generally pull the key elements from those. But it's not looking for you to go into too much more depth or explain it in detail. Basically just pulling from the definitions that the book gives you will be sufficient, for sure. Yeah, no worries. And like I said, I'm going to be here for another 15 minutes. So if you're done, please go ahead and, like you said, enjoy 4th of July weekend, whatever your plans may be. But I'll be here for another 15 minutes. So if you want to stick around. And happy Canada Day, 150 years of sovereignty. Well, I'm British, so I'll leave off that one. But yes, happy 4th of July, happy Canada Day. I've always meant to go visit Canada. I've come close a couple times, but good on them for splitting off. So if you're East Coast, those are French apartment blocks, right? That's how that works. Oh, okay. So you're not quite in French Canada territory. You're close, though. You're closer than Toronto. Okay, yeah, that's okay. I don't know too. We're rapidly reaching my limit of Canadian geography, but over here it's kind of just you just keep going north and you hit Canada. You cross over from Washington and it's basically just not too much changes over here. We don't really have the French influence as much, I would imagine. But again, what do I know? That's what I've heard. That dynamic would be really weird, I think. I took French in high school, but I doubt I would be prepared for that weird sort of blend. Yeah, like I said, I'm British, so I've done a lot of traveling to the UK, but I've not done a lot in the US or Canada, so that is something I would like to look forward to doing. Just to, like you said, just to check it out and see what's going on. And it's not that far away, so it's a little bit easier to do than a transatlantic. If you can ice skate A+, been quite a long time since I've tried to ice skate. yeah, I will see you on Thursday. And again, I'll do Thursday and most likely Sunday. So keep on studying, use the discussion board, and good luck with the final and whatever other classes you're taking, if there's any other finals coming up. All right, that'll be it for today. Thank you for coming, and see you on Thursday. Bye.